is up, everyone? Welcome to the channel today. Thanks for stopping by. So I can't go to a live stream without being asked, to put together a mastery setup guide. And it's been probably, I don't know, maybe like two and a half months since I did the beginner / intermediate mastery guide setup. It was really focused on people that had around 30 to 40 points to spend. And to be honest, I think that's actually a pretty good setup, still very viable. I'll leave a link to that down in the description if you want to go watch it. But I was planning on doing kind of an endgame mastery setup, which at the time when I put the that first setup guide together, I was not happy with my mastery setup. I had points in places that really were no longer viable now in 12.0 moving forward. And my plan was to revamp all of that, and I just haven't done it yet. With the scrapyard event that's going on right now, I do plan on grabbing all of those mastery cores and kind of completely redoing everything at the end of that event. But in the meantime, people keep asking, so I thought, you know what? Whether I have it set up perfectly the way I want it or not, I can still kind of show you the direction that I'm heading, kind of give you some advice, some tips maybe, if you're deciding through a couple of things. So with all of that in mind, let's jump right into the utility mastery. We'll start up there, we'll jump into the defensive tree, and then we'll end on the offensive tree. So let's get right into it. Now, before I get too far into this, I do want to mention that when I'm picking masteries and when I'm setting up my builds, I don't build them specifically for any set of characters or any one character in particular. I try to kind of look at my roster as a whole and pick things that will affect the majority of the champs that I use the majority of the time. So maybe an offensive build, defensive build, Mystic Dispersion, things like that. Those can be separate videos. But this is very much sort of a broad, general mastery setup that I use for the time being. So just keep all of that in mind. For the most part, I feel like the utility tree across the board is fairly simple. Obviously, you're looking to get dexterity, you're looking to get parry as quickly as you can. I think most people usually run 3 points in parry. Definitely would recommend that. It's a longer stun, reduces the amount of damage you're taking every time you parry, and for the amount of times that you parry in a fight, definitely worth it. The dexterity one, I have seen people run more than 1 point in. I'm not really sure that it's necessarily worth doing that for. The main purpose of of dexterity is to evade projectiles and special attacks maybe that would hit you otherwise, and you can get that with just 1 point. When you start adding 2 or 3 points, it just increases further the chance you have to crit with your very next hit, which maybe depends upon who you're running with. If you've got a champ that does like 1 hit on their special, so like maybe Iron Man, if you've got a special 2 that you're holding on to, and you want to use it, but you want to make sure that it crits. Maybe if you have 3 points in dexterity, you evade back and then immediately use your S2. There's a pretty good chance there it's going to hit pretty hard. But I feel like kind of across the board, it's really kind of lost by putting 2 more points in there for most uses. The 2 that I think people kind of struggle with putting a lot of points into, and I'll explain why I do, is Stupefy and Petrify. Now they kind of work hand in hand here with maxed out parry. So with a maxed out parry, you've got a 2-second stun. When you max out Stupefy, makes it a 2.5-second stun. And when you look at an overall fight, so let's just take an Alliance War fight for an example. It's a 3-minute fight. I would say if it's not a stun immune, know that you probably, and granted this is assuming that you're not going to die too within like the first 10 seconds, but let's say you go through a normal fight, you will probably parry stun them at least 5 times, if not probably more like 10 times during a normal fight. And I realize that Limber is going to reduce the stun duration a little bit depending upon how many points that they have. Obviously depending upon if they can shrug it off or not. But just a normal fight, again, just kind of across the board, looking at the majority of the fights. If you're parrying, let's say 10 times during a fight, let's say Limber reduces your 2.5 seconds down to, let's just call it a 2-second stun. That's 20 seconds of the fight that the enemy is stunned for. And if you've got maxed out Petrify, that means that for 20 seconds of the fight, their health regeneration and their power gains are reduced by 30%, which I think is a huge amount. You kind of throw that on top of other things like the Despair Mastery. You throw that on top of characters who can remove buffs on top of that. I think it's just a really, really strong mastery to have when you kind of take into consideration the amount of time that you have the enemy stunned for. Also, if you've got characters who do a lot of chain lock stunning, if you've got maybe Ronin that you're using, Hulk that you're using, You know, you've got additional time there that they will be stunned outside of parrying. So in that case, it benefits them even more. So I think that putting max points into Stupefy and Petrify is both a really good option. The game, I did have maxed out Pacify, but have since changed that really since Alliance Wars came out. I think it's a good mastery in and of itself, but I don't think that it outweighs the other masteries that you can choose in its place. You know, you've got characters that can nullify abilities, you've got stagger abilities, you've got things like Despair, characters who lower defensive ability accuracy. I think all of those kind of outweigh, again, putting points into Pacify. That's why I don't have anything there currently. Now, in the defensive tree, I would like to start with Willpower and talk about that, and then kind of work backwards from there. I'm still very much pro Willpower. I'm very much in the camp of Willpower. I think you should have 3 points in there, but at least have something. And do keep in mind, again, when I'm looking at masteries, I'm looking at not just what they do for one individual fight, but how they benefit me across the board in every single situation that I find myself in. And I think if you just, you just look at the nerf that happened to Willpower, and you just say, before when I got a bleed, my Willpower would stack. I could regain all of that damage from the bleed, and now it only regains 50%. Well, what you really need to look at is what that is actually doing to your champ through multiple fights. So in Alliance Questing, when you're running 10 plus fights, in Alliance Wars when you're running 5, 6 or more fights at a time, what is the benefit that I'm receiving from Willpower? And I think once you do that, that's when you really see the benefit of having it. Now, let's just use very easy round numbers. Let's say you've got 10,000 health and you have 1,000 damage worth of bleed that happens to you during a fight. Your Willpower is not going to cover all of that, but it is going to cover a portion of that. Let's just say it's 50%. So instead of ending the fight with 9,000 health, you actually end the fight with 9,500 health. And you can multiply that out now times 2, 3, 4, 5, however many fights you're going to run. Will you see a huge benefit in the health that you're recovering? No, but when you multiply that out times several fights, let's say you receive 400 more health than you would have at the end of the fight if you didn't have it. The next fight, you receive 600 more health than you would have if you didn't have it. When you multiply all of that out, you see that would have cost you a lot of units to be able to throw potions in and to recover all of that health if you didn't have it. The other thing to keep in mind is when you get right down to the end of a fight, let's say they've had bleed or they have some sort of degeneration that's on you, when you've got your last just couple, we got 3, 4, 500 health, I mean, you're just hanging on by a thread. If you would not have had Willpower, you would have already been dead. And a lot of times it's in that last couple hundred points there, you've got the maximum amount of damage that you're dealing. Let's say your assassin is also kicked in because you've got them down towards the end of the fight as well. That last few couple hundred hit points right there may allow you to finish the fight, which is going to save you from having to, if you've been killed otherwise, you didn't have Willpower. Now you got to spend revives, you got to spend units to buy revives, and none of that is cheap. So I think in and of itself, in an individual fight, Willpower is not a huge benefit. But if you step back and you look at the overall benefit that it is giving to your roster when you're running these longer events, Alliance Quest and Alliance Wars, for most of the time, I think that it is actually a fairly big help and a fairly big advantage to have Willpower. Like I said, put 1 point in if you want. I would definitely recommend you put at least 3 if you're going to get it. But that's kind of my push and the reason why I still use Willpower. As you can see, I've also got a point in Coagulate, which at one point in time, when you ran the Suicide Masteries, if you had Willpower set up and you had Coagulate, a couple other things, it was actually a net gain in your health. You would gain more health than the Suicide Masteries would deduct from you, which I know sounds crazy if you've just joined post-patch 12.0, but that was the reason why I was kind of moving down Coagulate over towards Suture. But it was expensive to open up, so I've just always kept the point there. That is part of the mastery redo that I'm going to do here at the end of the scrapyard. I'm going to take the point out of that. I'll talk about it more. I'm going to throw it over to the offensive tree. I'll talk about that when we move over there. As far as Inequity and Resonate go, I know Brian Grant did a couple of videos on that, talking about it in depth. I have really no experience with either of those. To be honest, I'm not sure that the benefits outweigh some of the other masteries that you can awaken with those points, or you can open up with those points. So for the time being, until I see a reason to put them in there, I'm going to skip over those. Now, for the other 15 points in order to get to Willpower, you can see what I've got set up here. I think the two that are definite musts here are Salve and Recovery. which when you have 3 points into recovery, salve actually ticks. It says there for 4 health twice per second, but it actually ticks for 5 with the recovery mastery maxed out. So it's 10 health per second. And again, if you're just looking at, you know, one individual fight, it doesn't seem like a lot because it's not. But let's say you've got a 20-second fight. That's 200 health that you're going to recover. And most fights are much longer than 20 seconds. But let's just say it's 20 seconds. And you do 5 fights. You know, that's 1,000 health that you regain passively without having to do anything. You didn't have to spend potions. You didn't have to spend units on buying potions. And that was for each and every one of your champs that you ran in there. So I think the salve is a definite, it's a big bonus to have. I think it's a huge overlooked mastery that people kind of sneeze at because the regen seems so low. The recovery is kind of a similar situation. In and of itself, not great, but it's going to boost your willpower. It's going to boost salve, like I just mentioned. Any character you have that is regenning, whether it be X-23, Wolverine, Doctor Strange, Dr. Voodoo, Scarlet Witch, you name it, if they are regenning and you've got recovery, it's 15% more health, regardless of if it's passive or if it's somehow a lifesteal. It's going to be boosting up all of those things. So recovery and salve to me are definite musts. Max them out. As far as everything else goes here, you can see what I put points into. If I don't have points there, it's because I'm not a big fan of it. The energy resistance and the physical resistance I think are garbage. Don't put points there. Perfect block, I guess you can argue taking points out of greater vitality and possibly putting it into perfect block if you want. I think the percentage is really, really, really small, not worth putting it into. And then stand your ground, maybe if you're going for a more defensive build, we can talk about that later, putting them in there. But for me, I don't really ever get hit by stand your ground. If I'm backed into a corner, I'm trying to evade that heavy hit. So stand your ground to me, I think, is a wasted point. I put points into greater vitality. Again, I sound like a broken record, but this falls into the line of thinking, you know, it affects all of my champs all of the time in every fight. Every little bit of health that I can gain back, you know, it's going to help get more willpower back because that's based upon a percentage of your health. So that's why I put points there. And then obviously block proficiency is good. That's going to pair up well with your parry to help reduce a lot of the damage that you're taking. So that's my defense. I feel fairly comfortable with that. Probably won't change it outside of moving Coagulate over into the offensive tree, which we will jump over there now. Now everything to the left of the skill and the mutant class mastery, I feel like that's pretty much across the board a fairly strong build. I think that's well accepted for just about any situation that you find yourself in. And really there's not a lot of explanation that is needed there. Cruelty and precision are probably the most important things you'll want to get after you've got parry and dexterity unlocked. Those two abilities, once you max them out, you see a huge increase to the damage that you're able to do. And then I like to pair that up with Pierce. Definitely put 3 points into Pierce. Every single crit Pierce is going to affect. So across the board, I really like that one. And then Courage, I know sometimes people are a little iffy on that one. Probably the longer you've been playing and the better you get at the game, you'll realize that you spend a large portion of your fights in Alliance Quest and Alliance War below 50% health. And when you're below that 50% health, that's a huge increase to your attack power. It's 20%. So like I said, you'll be spending a lot of time below 50% health, so definitely grab Courage, put 3 points in there as quickly as you can. Now for everything to the right of the skill and mutant class mastery, that's where things are a little bit screwed up right now for me. I'm going to start, I'll start up in the suicide masteries there, that top half. I do have glass cannon, I have recoil, and I also have liquid courage that are all unlocked. My plan, like I said before, back when you could get a net gain from having those in health when you had coagulate and other stuff, that's the reason why I had kind of unlocked all of that. But I hated recoil so much, I wasn't really pushing my PI up to try to get featured champs or anything like that. It was just strictly for the health and the extra damage. But I hated recoil, so I stopped all that, and then they nerfed willpower, so it didn't make any difference. But for the time being, I still do have a point in glass cannon, which that's just there because I don't have any other carbonadium cores to unlock anything further down below that in the Despair, Deep Wounds, and Assassin Mastery. Which, switching over to that, right now you can see I do have 2 points in Despair, and I also have a point in Unfazed, which I really like Unfazed, but I'm not sure I'm going to keep a point there. I unlocked it just to do a little bit of testing. So once I have all my cores kind of put up, I've got them all unlocked from the scrapyard. I'm going to be taking the point out of Glass Cannon, and I'll also be taking the point out of Coagulate. Be taking the point out of Unfazed and a point out of Despair and pushing those over into Deep Wounds and to Assassin. I feel like with the nerf to willpower, I don't necessarily feel like you need to have more than 1 point in Despair. I had 2 points there because before they nerfed willpower in 12.0, the champs like Ultron or mini bosses, you know, if they were recovering health in Alliance War, they were getting a huge amount of health back. And I was trying to bring in champs that could stack a lot of bleeds and things like that to help minimize the amount of health regen they were getting with despair. So obviously they nerfed all that in 12.0, and that no longer is necessary really to have more than 1 point just to unlock Deep Wounds and Assassin. I think probably I will max out Assassin, get it to 5.5, and I think if I've got what'll I have? I'll have 1 point in Glass Cannon to take out, 1 point in Despair, 1 point in Unfazed, so I'll have 3 more points left to put into my Deep Wounds ability, so I'll be at 4 or 5 there. I think it's probably a more benefit to have Assassin maxed out first than Deep Wounds. Again, it depends upon what champions you're using the most, but Assassin is going to affect every champ, regardless of bleed immunity, regardless of if they have a bleed or not. So that's going to affect the largest amount of champs. I'll get that one first. Then I'll put 4 or 5 into Deep Wounds, and then at some point I may either take a point out of Pierce. I don't want to say that. I probably won't take a point out of Pierce. I may take a point out of Petrify at some point, and then move that back over here and finish off Deep Wounds at 5 of 5. And then lastly, real quick, I will mention that I am going to go ahead and unlock Double Edge to open up all of the Suicide Masteries. Now that it's a lot cheap, well, I don't want to say it's cheap, but it's a lot cheaper to switch between Suicides and then your regular Mastery setup than it used to be. So when I'm running for featured champs coming up here, I don't know if I'm going to do Nebula, but definitely Yondu. I'm going to switch back and forth between those. Really, it comes down to you can either spend units to refresh champs and do more fights, or you can just unlock the Suicide Masteries, get more points per fight, and have to put fewer fights in. So if I'm going to spend the same amount of units either way, I would rather just do less fights and be able to put up more points than spend more time and do more fights. Because I know myself, I am not going to have enough time to do like a 500 or 600 streak, win streak. I'm only going to be able to do somewhere between like 350-ish, 375-ish. That's only going to get me, you know, somewhere probably between about 13 and 14 million points once I've got Suicide Masteries unlocked. But that should be enough to get most featured champs. So I hope that overall, you know, this has answered a few of your questions for the people that have been trying to see my Masteries forever. I know that not everything is set up perfectly how I would like it to be, but thankfully with the Scrapyard event going on, I will be able to kind of push forward where I would like to see my Mastery set up a lot quicker and a lot cheaper if I was having to spend units. Alright guys, if you have any further questions on any of this, I would be happy to help you out as best I can. Leave those down in the comment section below, or you can ask me questions over on Twitter. The link to that will be down in the description, so make sure you follow me there. I do realize this is a video game. You know, there are a lot of different opinions. There's a lot of different strategies. If maybe you like a Mastery setup more than I do, or vice versa, do keep in mind everybody is entitled to their opinion, and there's probably not one perfect way regardless of however you play it. So just keep all of that in mind. Alright guys, thank you so much for the support. As always, until I see you in the next video, have a great day.